Hi there! I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a wrap-up of both the second half of March Mystery Madness and of last week's Sequelathon. March Mystery Madness, of course, is the annual mystery-themed readathon that lasts for the entire month of March. It was originally created by Elizabeth from LizziefayeLovesBooks and Troi and is currently hosted by a whole host of hosts, all of whom I will mention below. The sequel-themed readathon I just discovered this year. I saw it on the channel of the T-Hags, and I believe that also has multiple hosts, and I will link to the announcement video where I found out about it below. It had a fun Die Hard parody icon that they created for it, which I thought was a lot of fun. So the first mystery and sequel that I picked up during this period is Whispers of Vivaldi by Beverle Graves Myers. This is the sixth and, as of right now, final volume in her Tito Amato series. This is set in the mid-18th century in Venice, and the main detective sleuth character is a castrato singer in Venice. At this point in the series, he's no longer an active performer, so he's doing a lot of things behind the scenes, and in this volume we see quite a few mysteries. There is a murder, which I don't want to share too much about, because if I share who was murdered, it's a bit of a spoiler for your earlier points in the series, but that's only one of the three mysteries that is running through this novel. The other two are a mystery surrounding whether a new opera was written by Vivaldi or whether it was written by a new up-and-coming violinist who may or may not be the bastard child of Vivaldi. There is also a mystery concerning one of the new superstar castrati who may or may not actually be a woman in disguise. So there's a lot of mystery regarding people's parentage, regarding the authorship of pieces of music, and regarding people's genders. I think the setting is something that the author is really entertained by, both in terms of general history of Venice and in terms of operatic history. I started reading the series years ago because I am a fan of Baroque opera, and that was the whole draw for me, and I've enjoyed these. I think there's a bit too much of things that might have happened once or twice in history being presented in these, which I always think is a little bit silly, but as mysteries they're pretty solid. I think I said that I think this is the last one in the series, and I've seen discussion of that online, but I haven't seen anything definitive from the author or the publisher, so I'm not 100% sure if there will be more. It has been a number of years since this one came out, released in 2014, so it's been a number of years since there's been one. It doesn't necessarily wrap things up, but it does put the main characters in a certain place in their life that is clearly different from where they started out at the beginning of the series. So I appreciated that. So if this is the end, I'm disappointed that there won't be more because it's a fun series, but it's a satisfying ending for most of the characters. You know, aside from the ones who got murdered along the way, of course. Next up, I read Kill or Be Killed, which is a 4-volume comic crime series by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Unlike a lot of their series, it's not a crime noir. This is more of a vigilante justice type story in which we have a character who survives a suicide attempt and then either sees a demon or hallucinates a demon that tells him to become a vigilante. The art in this is pretty solid. I wasn't as much a fan of the way the faces are drawn in this as I usually am with Sean Phillips's art, and I don't know if that is because he was doing something different here or if that's because the colorist was doing something slightly non-standard, because the coloring is very distinct in these. I found the series to be really compelling. I had taken the first 2 volumes out of the library, and as soon as I finished them I went and put the other 2 on hold because I did want to know how this ended. The main character is not necessarily super likable, so your mileage may vary on whether that's a make or break point of the series. In addition to the suicide attempt that opens this series, the character is also someone who had survived an earlier suicide attempt and had a father and brother who had both committed suicide. So it does deal with some fairly heavy mental health issues, but probably not in the most sensitive way. So again, if that's something that you are turned off by, that this might not be the series for you. But I do think it did interesting things in subverting one's expectations in terms of where the vigilante story would go and also where the demon versus hallucination story would go. So I thought this was well done, although I didn't love this nearly as much as I have enjoyed some of Brubaker and Phillips' work together on other books. As I said, I was very driven to go through this series and to read them back to back and finish it, but since it's now been a week since I've read them, I don't necessarily feel like they were the most compelling, like they had a lot of stickiness to them, but they were entertaining as I was reading them, so that's worth something. Also, Just as a side note, since this is a comic series, if you are reading this in public, be aware that there is quite a lot of graphic violence and some nudity, so... Thematically, on the absolute opposite side of things, I read The Glowing Heart, which is a middle grade novel in the American Girl Josefina series. This is part of the mystery series that ties into the main historical series of these middle grade novels plus dolls that the American Girl Company puts out. Josefina is the 1820s New Mexico character, and in this she's solving a theft. As with all of these series, there's a heavy educational element, so we learn a bit more about the operation of the ranch that she lives on. We learn a bit more about the cultural differences between her family living on this ranch and this visitor who's coming from Mexico City who's much more cultured, and there's some discussion about whether their family members are happy being in this rural area versus the city. There's lots of bits and pieces about Mexican-era New Mexico and about Navajo culture in the background, which is all very educational. As with a lot of these, the story is fairly predictable, but it doesn't fall into what a lot of the American Girl stories do, which is where the kids have figured something out early and they spend the second half of the book trying to share with the adults what they've found out. This is a little more complicated than that, which I appreciated, because I think in middle grade mysteries there's very much a tendency to go for the simplest possible solution, which I don't think is respectful of the kids who are reading this. So I appreciated that, and I thought it was nice and educational, as these stories should be. And finally, on the last day of March Mystery Madness, I read Nancy Drew, The Palace of Wisdom. This is the first volume in an ongoing comic series about Nancy Drew and her sidekicks Bess and George and the Hardy Boys. Updated for the modern era. This is written by Thompson and drawn by Jenn, and it's a cute updating of the characters. I would say tonally it's more in line with, say, the Nancy Drew Files of the late 80s and early 90s than it is like the classic Nancy Drew of the 40s. But it is still clearly the same characters. In this particular one, they're investigating a series of deaths and, you know, learning important lessons about friendship. The art is cute. The story both feels current, but also feels true to the characters as they were created. There's no Ned, so Nancy has a different love interest. Apologies for the noise, my dog's walking around over there. So I was reasonably charmed by it. It was cute. As with the usual Nancy Drew series, it's something that you could share with your kids, maybe slightly older kids than I think some of the classic ones, just because there are slightly heavier topics, but now that I think about it, there are a lot of murders in the Nancy Drew series, so maybe it was always kind of heavy and I just don't think that. I don't know. But still, it's definitely something that a younger audience and an older audience could enjoy together, I think. I'm going to do a general summary of March Mystery Madness in a separate video, but since this last week was the Sequelathon, I'm going to go through the challenges for that one and see if we maybe accidentally pulled off any of those. Challenge number 1 is read the sequel that you've been putting off the longest. And I have been putting this one off since 2014, apparently. I bought this when it first came out and sent it to my mother because she also reads this series. Or I had thought she read this series. She recently told me that she'd only ever read the first one, even though I gave her all of the rest of them. In any case, she's been telling me I should borrow the one I hadn't read for years. And yeah, 5 years. Number 2 is continue with a series that you started last year, and I did not do that. Number 3 is complete a series, and I did read all 4 of Kill or Be Killed, and this is the last in this series. So these are 2 series that I did complete. And the bonus is to give your TBR a fun name, but I didn't do a TBR video, so I failed at that. Still, that was an okay run. If you were doing March Mystery Madness, or if you were doing Sequelathon, let me know. Did you do both? Because I feel like they go together so well since so many mysteries are series. I've been watching a lot of March Mystery Madness videos lately, and it's definitely the odd book out that isn't part of a series, with the exception of true crime. Anyway, I hope you had a great weekend. That's it for now. Ciao.